Probably the most famous component of the Moog Model D is the Transistor Ladder Filter. The MiniMOD version is a faithful replica of the 24 dB per octave low-pass filter. Notably, the original filter was patented by Bob Moog on October 28, 1969. I was 6 years old. While the Moog Ladder Filter is possibly the most widely cloned filter in the world, AJHSynth states, "Not all ladder filter replicas are born equal." This is actually a very important piece of modular gear, let alone a synthesizer component, so I urge you, if interested, to check out AJHSynth's website and documentation about their transistor ladder filter. They took great pains to ensure that it's the closest it can possibly be to the original eargasm-generating sound of the Model D. Looking at the panel, there is a nice fat frequency or cutoff knob at the top, ranging from -5 to +5, though I cannot tell you what frequency range that ends up being. Not my forte. This value can of course be modulated using the filter's 1 volt per octave, 1/3 CV and 2/3 CV jacks and attenuators. I'm not sure if that's 1/3 and 2/3 because that doesn't make sense to my brain. You'll see why later in a minute. There's also attenuators for frequency CV. The 1 volt per octave CV is typical to most eurorack format filters, where the voltage coming in can modulate the frequency value, and then the frequency knob then becomes an offset or center of said modulation. What's interesting on this filter is the 1/3 and 2/3 jacks. And again, I don't know if that's really 1/3 or 2/3. So let's read what the manual says, and you tell me what that's supposed to, how you're supposed to pronounce that. The 1 volt CV input changes the filter cutoff rate at 1 volt per octave. The manual states this emulates the vintage Model D as for having the keyboard control switch 1 and 2 set to on. This jack sets the pitch of the filter when self-oscillating. The 1/3 CV input changes the filter cutoff at the rate of 3 volts per octave. And the manual states this emulates the Model D as for having the keyboard control switch 1 set to on and 2 set to off. And then there's the 2/3 CV input, changes the filter cutoff rate at 1.5 volts per octave. And the manual states this emulates a vintage Model D as far as having the keyboard control switch 2 set to on and switch 1 set to off. Now, I don't have a vintage Model D, so I can't tell you what that really means. I'm assuming there's switches on the deck that you can switch to make things happen. So frequency CV, this attenuator is for how much voltage coming in the frequency CV jack is set to the cutoff circuit. Note that this can be a 0% to 130% voltage range, meaning you can exceed the actual voltage being sent in by 130%, which allows something called overmodulation effects. I imagine this is a sort of screaminess, I'm not sure. There is an emphasis knob to the far right of the first row, also with an emphasis CV attenuator directly to its left. Emphasis in this module means resonance. So the higher the resonance, the squawkier the filter becomes. The emphasis CV, of course, attenuates the CV coming into the emp CV jack here. And finally, for the I/O of this module, I've never seen this before in a filter, but this is interesting. In the Model D, you had 3 VCOs, and this filter has 3 in jacks, 1 for each of the VCOs. Each of the jacks level is controlled by a knob in the bottom row. Simply put, this is a mixer of sorts. What initially confuses me about this setup is that all 3 VCOs, of course, are filtered exactly the same way because it's a 3 in and 1 out, all mono, of course. But I imagine this is exactly how the mono-synth Model D functioned. I'm spoiled by stereo filters in Eurorack. There's one more feature on the filter to mention, and that is the override circuit. On the back, there's a jumper. By default, it is enabled or jumped on the filter, and it operates normally. However, when removing this jumper, it causes the module to enable an overdrive circuit, which increases the gain signal by up to 70% before sending it to the filter core, which the manual says can generate a nice warm overdrive effect. This simulates an old Model D trick of plugging the output of the headphone jack back into the VCF external input on the Model D. I'll talk about the gain switch mult later, but so I don't have to mess with jumpers, I have a switch right here that turns that feature on and off. So let's listen to what this filter sounds like. I'll take one of my VCOs and plug it into in 1, turn up its volume. Let me turn down the other ones because we're not using them. Turn all the thingies down, crank up the filter. Then I'll come out of the filter. I'm coming out of the filter to data just so we can see the waveform. Let me come down to a lower note real quick. Let me sweep the filter. So this sounds like a typical filter, right? Only a ton warmer. So that sounds pretty cool. If I crank up the emphasis, which is again the resonance, so what I was doing earlier in one of these patches is I was taking a second envelope and putting it into volt per octave, and then using an envelope to control the filter, as well as the amplitude. Now the thing I wanted to look at, I wanted to demystify this for myself. I would like to know what the difference is between these three jacks here. So I'm gonna, instead of using the keyboard, I'm gonna just use a voltage generator down here. So this voltage generator down here is I'm just gonna raise the voltage, and you'll watch on data and hearing your ears, the cutoff frequency is gonna raise by 1 volt per octave, right? So now if I move it over to the 1/3, and then I raise the same amount of voltage all the way down to all the way up, you hear how it's very little? So this is the one that raises it by 3 volts per octave. So I guess what it's saying is it takes 3 times the amount of voltage to open the filter. So, and it's still only 10, I think it's only 10 volts here, so you're still only going to get, you're not going to get the filter wide open like you would normally. I think that's what that means. And then the same with the 2/3, which is 1.5 volts per octave, so it's a little bit less than 1 volt per octave as far as the range goes. But you can see it on the scope. So now if I leave this voltage wide open and I come back to the 1/3, it's pretty muted, and then the full 1 volt per octave is open wide. Okay, I think that makes sense to me. So if you just want subtle control over the filter, like an LFO or something, oh wait, we can do that, can't we? We can do that. We have an LFO right here. So again, because this is a very small 3 volts per octave, it's moving the filter very little, the cutoff very little. 1 volt per octave would be wider, and then 2/3 would be not as wide. I'm rambling now. I think I know what's going on. That's it. That was just for me, not for you. I don't know if I'll even put that in the video. The filter is pretty amazing. I like the fact that you can mix all 3 oscillators together in here. My goodness. Oh. You know what that sounds like? Oh, and there's that. I'm jumping ahead, but this is the little gain switch. Just makes it raunchier. And you wonder why I never get any recordings done, because all I do is sit here and play around and have fun. Alright, that's enough for this one.